It's a pleasure to have you here with us today in this space and place to have dialogue and conversation. My name is Juana Reynosa Gomez. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I am the Program Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Sustainability at Truckee Meadows Community College, and I have been there for a little bit over a year. Prior to that, I worked at the University of Nevada, Reno for 17 years and Sonoma State in Northern California. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
And my name is Doctora Olga Messina, and I am the mental health professional at Truckee Meadows Community College in the Counseling Center. Yeah. And so I've been working at TMCC now for about 10 years. And so I absolutely love it. And before that, I was with the state as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. So that's my background. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya as well.
So our session today, dismantling toxic masculinity, changing narrative and mental health among Latinx Latino students. So I do want to say I do not identify as a man. I am not biologically a man. I am Latina. I identify as a female, as a woman. I am the mother of two, I get emotional. I am the mother of two twins that are 10 years old. And so I am raising young men. And that's where my passion comes for this topic and working with young men in higher education that identify as Latinx and or as Latino.
And so same situation with myself, except I have a young girl, but I do work with all of our athletes. At TMCC, we have our soccer team. Yeah, go Wizards. And so I work with our young men, our soccermen team. I do work with the ladies, but it's a little bit more of an effort with the young men just because scholastically, their GPAs is going to be different when we're recruiting them, and we'll show a slide on this. Their GPAs are also different, so it's lower. And at CMCC itself, Latinas are going through and being successful. However, our Latinos are not going through TMCC and being successful. So this is something that we're targeting, and we want to go ahead and kind of figure out what's going on. How do we address this? All that kind of stuff.
So we do have to show these slides for those of you joining us on Teams. A shout out to you. Thank you for joining us this morning. All meetings are recorded and the recording will begin now. Well, I think it started about 15 minutes ago, but that's okay. And all recordings will be available for playback via the Diversity Summit website within 72 hours of the session time. So what you can expect today, defining toxic masculinity, the history and acceptances within toxic masculinity, comprehend the barriers to mental health when it comes to surrounding support services for Latinx Latino students, and identifying the signs of suicide versus self-harm, identify steps to implement culturally relevant mental health support services, and identify culturally relevant community resources and create partnerships. And we used, you'll see throughout, we use the images. If you've has anyone ever played Loteria? Okay, it's the most like, I don't even know, right? Like you have el borracho, el valiente, you know, the drunk, the courageous man, the mermaid, la sirena. So oftentimes a lot of the things within the culture is how do you say that? Propagated, yes. I will also, I was going to say something and I forgot my last thought, but if it comes back to me, I'll share it.
All right, so now we want you guys to do an activity. In your mind or on your table, I want you to discuss, right, the person next to you. Go ahead and discuss what is toxic masculinity for you? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What have you seen? Or if you're like, oh, this movie represents that. So we'll take about 2 to 3 minutes. And if you don't have anyone with you, just go ahead and turn to the group next to you or behind you. And then this way you guys can do this activity.
And those of you on Teams, so you kind of just think about this among yourself. Okay, rapid conversations. If you can hear me, clap your hands twice. Okay, bravo. Anyone would like to go ahead and give us your understanding or how you would define toxic masculinity?
Yes.
So, and my understanding of defining toxic masculinity is that when you're forced into a role that you didn't understand in the first place, and to be told that you have to be the individual that provides, that has no feelings, that has to never have moments of mental health check, or you're, because of the way you look, you should be doing this and not doing what men do, not what you identify with. And I've been there before. The reason why I said define it that way is because of the way I look, the conception would be, oh, you should have this, you should be in this place, you should have children. Where's your wife? You don't have a wife. So I believe that's toxic because it hurts me mentally, physically, and spiritually.
Definitely, yes. Anyone else?
I'll piggyback on that. So I love it in my experience and trying to learn inside myself today as well. In my experience, what I learned from the people that I sit with and talk with is it is taking on this role that my new companion says is about value, but the idea is that needs are met through intimidation. That's how the needs get met.
Anyone else? Give me chills.
So my understanding of toxic masculinity is I grew up without a father, so that changes my perspective because I have 3 older sisters and my mama, single mother. So what I always was sharing with the gentleman here is that I grew up in other people's homes, and I would watch the interaction between the fathers and my friends. And toxic masculinity to me was the the idea of projecting strength at all times, disregarding emotions, disregarding people's feelings. And it was just a projection of strength at all costs. And, you know, I was always growing up with that. And then I joined the Marines, which is a super toxic masculinity. It was always one of the things that I grew up with sisters. So the toxic masculinity idea would always conflict with my everyday life because, you know, I'm not going to treat my sisters or my mom that way. But that was my experience with toxic masculinity, to be correct and project strength at all costs. And that's how I see toxic masculinity.
Thank you. Yes.
If I may, it's my understanding and experience that it's also a undeserved or undue sense of entitlement or ownership.
Yes. Thank you for including that.
So just to kind of just take a moment here and think about this for a minute. It's carrying a great weight, right? Whether you are biologically a man and or you identify as a man. Mental pain is less dramatic than physical pain, but it is more common and also more hard to bear. C.S. Lewis.
All right, so machismo, where does it originate, right? Where did we get this concept? And so in the 1940s, there was a candidate named Camacho, and they shortened it for his slogan, macho. So if you wanted to be machos in the 1940s, then you would have these ideals. At the same time, we had film stars like Jorge Negrete. So to give you an idea of what he looks like, Tapatio, the salsa Tapatio with the guy with the big hat and the beard, the mustache, that would be him, right? And so he was like El Valiente, which is on a previous slide. And so all of his movies and everything, and even though they had sometimes strong female counterparts like Maria Felix, he would always still wind up dominating her, right? And then she would be the submissive, right? At the end, he would always still be, because even though she would fight back and be like, you're not going to dominate me, you're not. In the end, to have that happily ever after, right? So this is one of the things that we want to definitely talk about, where Marianismo and machismo go hand in hand, right? So Marianismo is taking a look at the submissive wife, right? So we have that dualism when we're looking at either you're that submissive, good wife, right? Because that's where that moral comes in as far as being a good wife. Or you have the narrative, and it also comes with the narrative of the virgin, right? And then the counterpart is the narrative of a whore, right? So the prostitute going out and, not being submissive, doing what they want, right? And not understanding that this is not how you're going to get a man, right? So these are the things and where they come from. And so it's definitely and what we've been talking about, which is that exaggerated sense of manliness, right? And so it's very much about dominance. It's very much about entitlement. You guys hit on it, all of the attributes, right?
Just really quickly, I want to add, machismo can be looked at negative and positive. And right, so if you've heard of a caballerismo, like to be a gentleman. And so it's also in a lot of the literature. Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes depicted as a caballero who was noble and humble and a hero, and he represented chivalry. The other thing to acknowledge is ancestral trauma. A lot of us are still processing based on your ancestors, the trauma that they experienced, it gets passed on. And so result of European colonization and the Spanish conquest. So to stay alive, men needed to be dominant during that time. Hispanic, Latino, Latinx males are taught to be protectors, which is a lot of what you have already said in the conversations. And so this can mean that perhaps the violence, control, and strength are acceptable. And the protector is not someone who is vulnerable. You don't express feelings. You don't show weakness. You're not a mandilon, which is like you don't do what your wife tells you. And
you're the one that's in charge.
Yeah, you're the one that's in charge, and or any other emotions. And I will say, I grew up with that. My parents are very traditional Mexican. They came at a young age and had a family here in the United States. And I would see my dad was a provider. My dad was a protector. My mom stayed at home. My mom had hot meals for my dad when he came. My mom washed the clothes. She ironed. Who irons anymore? I don't. There's a steamer. And, she would iron his clothes. She would take his clothes to the bathroom when he showered. It was just like the servantness, right? To serve the man in the house. I remember taking my dad's boots off when he got home from work, but he had 3 girls. So,
and to piggyback on that, I had a little bit of a different dynamic because my mom worked full time, but my dad did as well, right? But on top of that, she would come home and still do all the other tasks that Juana's talking about, right? And so there was a combination of us. So there's 5 of us. There's 3 girls and 2 boys. And so growing up, I was number 4 out of 5. Okay. And so when it came time to do all the things, taking off my dad's shoes, and my dad even took it a step further, but I didn't notice that my mom didn't know about this until I actually mentioned it to her. I was maybe 7. And so he would have us bring him his water when he was in the living room and kneel and wait until he was done. And then if he needed a refill, he would tell us he needed a refill. And then we would go and get it. Okay? And once again, kneel wait till he was done. And I was like, oh, and I did it in front of my mom. And she's like, what are you doing? Right? She's like, oh, that was the best argument ever that we had, right? Because it was just interesting. She's like, what are you doing? She's like, why are they kneeling before you? She's like, I understand getting you the water. So there's still that, but it wasn't for her. There was a limit to the submissiveness, right? Because she had to bring in her own money as well because she was working. And she was able to exert some control still about the shopping and what we were able to do. So even if dad sometimes would say no, mom would say, well, I'm going to buy it for them because I have my own source of income, right? So it was interesting to see those dynamics where it's like, okay, so you do serve, but there's a limit to it. So that's kind of what I have ingrained. And so it was really interesting for me when it comes to that, just being able to express that. But I was like, and I also figured out, I'm like, wait a minute, I have power. I saw that because I was like, if I disclose all of this, does mom know, right? Does dad know? Like those types of things. Anyways, so when we're looking at acceptable expressions of emotions, we look a lot about shame, right? If you're expressing anything other than anger, then that comes with shame. And Brené Brown is amazing when it comes to all of that work and working through shame and those types of things. So we're having men push and the feelings down, right? And so this is one of the things that when you have no avenue other than anger, that's going to be what's expressed, right? Because that's the only acceptable one. Showing vulnerability is not acceptable, right? You can't give someone the quote unquote in to get to you, right? Because you're supposed to be the one that's protecting the first line of defense for everything, for your family. And so we have anger, but what do you do when you have nothing but anger, right? We tend to push those people away. And so that leads to isolation. And so when you're in that space where you're angry and you're isolated, this is some of the expressions that we're seeing with our young folks and our males, where the violence that is exuded feels like where did that come from? They don't have any other avenue as far as expressions of emotions or how quote to quote behave, right? And so we have the same thing that happens when we look at punishment, right? So what do we do with folks that break the law? We isolate them. And even in the prison system, what happens when they break those internal rules? They get isolated as well, right? They go to solitary confinement. Never once are we addressing anything other than this is anger. This is, we're shoving all of the feelings and everything away. Okay? So when we're looking at how to support or what it looks like, we need to understand that the lens is coming from, can you perform? What can you provide for me, right? And this is a topic, right, that we talk about still to this day. There's providers. What is it that you can bring to the table, right? And this is something that most males, if they don't feel like they are able to And I've heard this from many of my students, well, I don't have anything to offer. Why would she or he go out with it, right? And so that's really impactful when they don't feel like they are that archetype, whatever that might be. And so they're able to say, well, I can't, I won't, I shouldn't, right? And so it really helps to understand that this is kind of the archetype that Latino males, Hispanic males are being raised under. And unfortunately, right, this has generalized across or down South America as well as across the world, right, as far as being machismo. And so we really need to look at the effects of acculturation and assimilation, right? So if we look at the first generation of folks, so I was the first generation born here and seeing what I saw, right? But there's that layer, as our first speaker was talking about, as far as like what I'm passing on, right? And so what you're going to be passing on, and then the next layer of what you're going to be talking about, right? And so what is it that you're going to be passing on? But I think we really truly need to break down and understand where this is all coming from, right? Because sometimes when you're like, if you guys would just go to a therapist, why don't we just go to counseling, right? Where we can process this. Why would I ever choose to go to counseling, right? That's a foreign concept. That's no.
Full disclosure and vulnerability, right? If I'm going to be here with you, as our speaker in the morning said, I'm going to speak to you like your familia, like your family. Is that okay?
Sure.
I live with this. I was born and raised in California. My husband is from Jalisco, Mexico. And so I see the culture clash and the cultural differences, even though I have the culture too, but I have assimilated. And I still keep my traditions. And that's why it's so important for me to have this conversation raising young Latinos, young men, because they need to know it's okay. And never more have I experienced this. I get emotional. So I really feel like your familia. My husband lost a brother, a traditional Mexican family of 17, two sets of twins, hence why we have twins, very Catholic, first sibling to pass away. And my husband isn't able to process. Hard. And having that conversation with my children so they can process and know that it's okay to ask for help. And I have to, a lot of you said like, oh, men don't cry, suck it up, is to reverse that and be like, no, it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to cry. And it's also okay to ask for help. And so this is what our young men are dealing with. Very similar things, emotional struggles. Like I feel the pain, but I don't know how to say what I'm feeling. My husband straight up said, I don't like to talk about this. I'm fine. And I'm like, but are you really? And all I could say was like, I love you. We are here for you if you ever need it. But he's not the only one. Right? The only one that isn't willing to talk about it, isn't willing to process, not even with his wife of 17 years. So the pride is there. And I've also seen it in working with young Latino, Latinx men who are experiencing trauma, hard times, right? Being a college student is difficult. You're navigating home culture, school culture, maybe you have a job, so many things. And not unwilling to go and speak to a counselor when it's a free service to you at your college campus. And how to break the barriers, right? The trauma. How many of you heard of the chancla, whether you're Hispanic, Latino or not, right? Like, I'm gonna throw my sandal at you, I've really tried to break that. Did I find myself early on in my parenthood doing that? Absolutely, yes. Like, if you don't quiet down or settle down, I'm gonna grab my chancla and go spank you or throw it at you. And so it's very common, and trying to break that cycle because I don't want my kids to pass that on. So just full disclosure sharing here.
Oh, wait, good. Thank you for just.
Okay.
One of the other things that we're also having to deal in process is one of our assistant coach for the soccer team passed away, was one of the first folks that passed away from COVID on our campus. So sad, right? And so it was really difficult to be able to have the students process that, right? And be able to truly talk about it. And as family members, as have passed, right? Being able to say, how can we help you? How can we assist you? I'm fine. Everything's fine, right? And so it's really having that one-on-one relationship and the relationship with the group as a whole to be able to say, how can we assist you, right? Where can I meet you? And so one of the things that I do often is I do a lot of bilinguals, right? So Spanglish, right? So being able to talk to the students and say, hey, don't give up, how are you doing, right? And being able to identify and tell them, hey, I'm here for you, right? One of the things that I always often do is talk about resources. Talk about, hey, did you know that you can do this? Did you know that you're able to do this? Why don't we all schedule a meeting with me one-on-one? And then let's go over this, right? If you want to. Nothing is ever forced except them attending my skills development class, right? So it's really being able to process that because we have a lot of that trauma on campus, right? And we have students that are coming back, but many of our young Latinos were forced because of COVID, right? And their parents not being able to maintain their jobs, had to go to work, right? And be that additional breadwinner. And so a lot of our students, because we have a program where we're having students, men of color, and we mentor them in high school and then have them transfer into TMCC. We had 2 that year, right? Because the rest of them were like, I can't, I have to go to work, right? Because whatever that money might be is going to be what helps keep us in our home, helps feed us, whatever that might be, right? And even more so if they did lose someone in their family, right? Because then that responsibility is like, well, now that you're a man, right? You need to go ahead and step up and do this. And what do you need the education for? You can go get a job. And one of the things that I think that I love that we have the partnership with Tesla, but it's also can be detrimental because once you go into that line of work, right? You do need the skills. You do need to be able to know how to run all the machining and all that kind of stuff. But you're also going in and you're like, where else besides construction, right? Am I going to be able to earn this much money, right? My parents don't earn this much money. And so it's really tempting to say, I'm going to go for the here and now versus that long term. And so when we're looking at the signs of suicide, I wanted to give you guys some data, okay? When it comes to Latinos, Nevada is 30% Hispanic, okay? So as of 2021. And so, but when we look at the mental health usage, clinic usage, it has decreased significantly. But one of the things that is addressed in the report where I got this from Health and Human Services is the clinics are also disappearing. So that's why that decrease, right, which is really huge. If I can't go somewhere to go and actually talk to someone, of course my usage is going to decline, even if I was open to it, okay? And so that's something that we've been hit with very, very much so in Northern Nevada is having clinics that are available, and either take no insurance or Medicaid, right? Or Medicare and that kind of stuff. So that's another factor as well. And the rurals have the same issue, even more so. And so the suicidality, when we look at the Latino Hispanic population, is significantly lower when we look at our counterparts as far as Caucasian or African American, and especially with Native Americans, right? And one of the things that is on the opposite, and I went nationwide for the opioid use, is opioid use and alcohol abuse. Now there, our numbers are really high, okay? And so that's why I wanted to talk about suicidality, self-harm, and really get into that and explore that. When we look at illicit drug use, it's highest among Puerto Ricans when we're looking nationwide, okay? And then 91% of Hispanic Americans say that they do not have access to a rehabilitation center should they want to detox. That's pretty significant, right? So getting folks to get to that point and then actually getting them access to care is very difficult. Okay? So these are young men and women. It has all the demographics. But I wanted you to take a look at our schools from 2021 to 2022. Okay. So if we look at Hispanic, look, incidents, including a weapon, is 45%. I mean, we're number one, right? Incidents including violence, 41%. Incidents including alcohol beverages, 49%. Incidents using controlled substances, 48%. When we look at our males, they double what the females are doing when we're just looking at gender, okay? So it's being demonstrated in our schools, right? We're seeing this. It's really definitely something that we're taking a look at. And we have the data to support everything, right? When we look at the disadvantaged, individuals, economically disadvantaged and English language learners, there is that difference there. Because poverty definitely is that equalizer across the board, right? And so not for the best, but I wanted you guys to kind of get this picture because all the things that we're talking about, I mean, you just have to look at our schools. Right? And these are the young folks that are coming into our colleges and universities, right? So how do we meet them where they are? Avoid being judgmental, right? Meeting them where they are. And sometimes they are going to come to you and be like, I am the man, or I have this vehicle, or, making sure that their hair is styled and they smell the best. Or we were shopping the other day with Juana, and I was like, I need a perfume that people are not going to smell me before I enter, right? Like the middle school boys that you're like, let's talk about, right? Let's talk about.
It's either they got too much or they got nothing at all, yeah.
Yes. But either way, it's overwhelming, right? And I love middle school as well, but definitely could not be me enough to teach in middle school. I love the higher education. So self-harm is not suicide. So self-harm could be the opioid use, the alcohol abuse, but we're also talking about it can be when you're cutting yourself. This is what we think of when we talk about self-harm, right? It's when you're cutting yourself, and it can be in different places of your body. And the cutting is usually pretty high amongst our females, right? But let's talk about self-harm when we're looking at our males, okay? And that's where we go with the alcohol, the opioid abuse, the illicit drug use, the violence, right? And so encouraging folks to get help. So NSHE, which thank you for this, we're doing mental health first aid. There's also Assist, Safe Talk, all of those initiatives. So we have the ability to get the training, right? Being able to say, here's how we do that, and you're able to go ahead and route folks to their specific areas to get that assistance, which is so significant, right? To be able to say, so I would highly encourage you all, if you're able to attend one of these trainings, please, please, please do, right? Because you're able to see that, and this is across the board. One of the things that I definitely focused on at TMCC for Assist and Safe Talk were for frontline folks, right? Our facility staff, our admin assistants, because if a student's coming in upset and crying because they have that past due balance, and they're struggling because their boyfriend just dumped them and now they're getting kicked out, all these things are kind of just really it has become overwhelming. It's going to be those folks that are going to get that and getting the story. And then if those folks are trained to be able to say, you know what, have you met my friend Olga? And this is always something that I do, right? When I'm having referrals, it's Olga. Even though I introduce myself in formal settings as Dr. Messina, but for the students, I'm always Olga, right? Have you met my friend? And this is always something that I do because we want to ensure that I'm going to do that handoff and be able to say, this is a person that I trust and that you're going to be safe with. Okay? The other things is community mental health. So luckily we're getting more and more clinics that are opening up softly from all the ones that we lost. And being able to create those partnerships, right? So we need to do a referral out into the community, right? So some cases that we've seen is, students who are dual diagnosis. So they could be working with our DRC, but then they also have really high mental health incidences. Are they retaining in school? How can I help you retain in school, right? So do you have access to your medication if you need medication? Do you have access to long-term counseling because we do short-term counseling on campus. So being able to be that connection to ensure that we're retaining our students, right? And then ensuring that those providers are diverse themselves. That's very key, right? Are they going to know, am I going to have to repeat my story to them? So usually I try and say, is it okay if I tell your story and tell them what's going on? Because having to retell everything sometimes is like reopening that wound, getting that trauma back open, right? And then assure them that you care, okay? So this is where this is Olga, how can I help you, right? Outreach is critical. So one of the things that I have been doing is doing a lot of outreach to our EMS programs, so emergency medical services, because we definitely have to open up those lines of communication. but we've also, being able to do some groups. And usually how I get students to attend is I ask faculty to give them extra credits, right? And then once they're there, oh, this isn't so bad. You can come back, yeah, this isn't so bad. I think this is not, you're right, this is okay, not so bad. I'm like, I promise, I don't bite until the second session. You guys are fine, right? And getting them laughing, getting them to, like, I want us to go deep, but then making sure that we come back up to where we need to be before that session is over. Okay. And so we're actually really lucky because Skylar Cruz, he's a male counselor at Team CC who also identifies as Latino. So I'm always able to say, we have a Latina and we have a Latino when we're going to counseling. So the students, if they're like, I don't know if I want to talk to Olga, right? Then how about Skylar, right? Because the students will come in and say, I need someone that speaks Spanish. I need someone that's Latino, right? And so that's something that we can now offer, which I'm very excited about, right? And that's meeting them where they are. And then if we are able to get folks to their resources, always ensuring that they don't have whatever those means are. On a college campus, right, or university, we're looking at sober living communities, right? Really talking about that support. And even sometimes going into that environment of, oh, we're going to be talking about emotions, right? And for me, it's about how can we be preventative versus reactive, okay? That's huge for me. And so we need to ensure that when we're talking about going and doing things, and luckily anything that's mentioned by NG, right? We have to ensure that there's no drugs or alcohol for our student groups and that kind of stuff. Or if there are, they typically have to take some sort of alcohol awareness type of a class, right? So that's something to kind of just in a quick summary, right? Because we're pressed for time, to kind of ensuring that we talk about self-harm. And I wanted to open up the possibility for you that it's not just cutting, right? And it's not just females cutting.
I just want to add one of the ways, to reassure them that you care within the Hispanic, Latinx, Latino culture, cariño, affection is something that, is in the home. You were raised, we are raised with it. I was raised, in my experience, I was raised with it. And so being able to empathize, meet them where they're at, but also express some of that to create the rapport, to build the rapport so that they feel comfortable opening up. And we'll talk a little bit more, but we had an event and we got pan dulce, right? Because it's like everybody has pan dulce at some point in time in their life or throughout the year. It actually gets cold, not like Vegas and Reno. It gets colder, I think. And so, it's very common during the winter months, but at any time of the year, un cafecito with pan dulce, coffee with some sweet pastries.
So our culture goes around food, right? Which is not uncommon to other cultures. So that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about was bringing it in around the food, right? Because if nothing else, you can nibble on the food and you're avoiding talking about the emotions. All right, so one of the things that we want to talk about is teaching men and those that identify as masculine is being able to go ahead and stand up and take responsibility, right? So this is more from a social justice restorative type of a process. Being able to identify whether the other person is going to accept it or not. That's not the point. The point is being able to stand up and say, okay, I may have done this and done this transgression against you, right? And so being able to take that responsibility and say, I did this, right? Versus it being, I can't, not around my homies or around my compadres, right? I can't be like that. I can't be like taking the calls from my girlfriend whenever she calls or, expressing emotions or with my girlfriend or my wife or my kids or whatever that might be. And so one of the other things that I try and talk to students about is fighting against the stereotypes, right? So when we're looking at the stereotypes and that's all of the things that we've been talking about, right? So how are you propagating that agenda, right? That agenda that's been placed on us. And that always helps to bring that home, right? Where it's like, oh, and how are you like limiting us as a community? Because we are very much community based, right? And so and that helps with that responsibility piece. Teaching communication skills, right? The I statements, all those types of things instead of the you. And it's going to take time, right? Teaching emotional intelligence and active coping.
So with active coping, I have my notes here because I couldn't remember this. It's characterized by how to solve problems, seeking social support services, seeking professional help, and reframe the meanings of problems. So relearning, reteaching, if it wasn't something that was modeled for you in the home, being able to have conversations about how to build these skills, because you can't just, it's not going to happen overnight, right? And I think role playing, as the gentleman from the morning 9 o'clock presentation or 8 o'clock presentation, he said like role playing is a way to learn. And so I think in small groups, if you're able to facilitate that, it's going to be huge. One other thing I want to share is that I found this, and this was after we made our slides, but earlier when I said machismo can be negative and positive. So there's two researchers out there, Hurtado and Sinha, and they have this feminist inclusive masculinity. And so they take a positive focus on forms of masculinity rather than toxic. I do want to make sure that we acknowledge both. And so this has 4 dimensions. So dimensions, emphasis on being an ethical human being, having emotionally healthy relationships with others, being involved in activism and social justice oriented activities, and rejecting aspects of hegemonic masculinity. So I think that's, ultimately where we want to get with, Latinx, Latino young men.
One of the other things about teaching emotional intelligence and active coping, like you were talking about, is that boundary setting, right? And that's something that I work with both our young men as well as our young women, right? So being able to identify, is this my baggage or is that your baggage, right? Let's figure out, am I owning your stuff? Is what you're thinking about really going to affect my reputation, right? Those types of things, and being able to talk about. And I often use the role play as being able to say, okay, this is not my responsibility, right? Or being able to say, I'm in a professional environment, and this is how I need to behave, right? When we talk to our student workers and those types of things. So being able to identify it and being able to say, okay, in this environment, this is the boundary that I need to use for my safety, for my career safety as well. And just being able to identify that it's okay to use that, and hoping that it's going to generalize into other areas of their life if they're not willing to address it point on. Okay. And so when we look at, I want to kind of bring us back. So men, masculinity, not the problem. Okay. I definitely wanted to start closing us with this because we don't want men to be like completely turned off when we talk about toxic masculinity. Oh, I can't even be a man anymore. Right? I've heard that a lot, right? When you start talking about toxic masculinity and what that means and how we're talking about emotions, we're talking about boundaries, all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, right? Because I definitely heard that, right? And I've gotten that feedback. But this is where I usually start with being a man, being a masculine man. There's no issue with that. Okay? But let's talk about the boundaries. When I step over and I feel like I need to submit for you to submit in order to be in my life. Okay? And we go back to the restorative justice. So really for me, that's an ideal launching point because it's you owning that responsibility. And then where do we go from here? The other person may not be ready, but you need to work on what is it that you want, right? Have you subjugated someone? Have you, right? Like really owning that to be able to move from that space to another space. And then it comes with, so what some of the things that we've been doing at TMCC, like Juana was talking about, las pláticas or the talks, right? So these are monthly sessions that we just started. How did I get students there? Extra credit, right? And then once they were there, they're like, not so bad. Okay, right? And so we're going to go ahead and reconvene for this month and in November. But it's really being able to have those conversations. And we opened it up to Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and their allies, right? Because we need to identify that there are other allies on campus. And it really helps to develop that sense of community. And TMCC being a commuter college, because we don't have any dorms, everybody just comes sometimes and takes a class and then they leave, right? And so being able to have, hey, there's this other person, I may not be fully accepted in my own community with these changes, right? Because anytime anything starts to change, what does the system do? Puts added pressure to ensure that that individual, that component kind of goes back to where they need to be, right? You're not acting the way you should be acting. You're changing. Now that you're going to college, you've changed, right?
And I just want to add to that, we hosted it the first month being part of Hispanic Heritage Month, over 2-hour time period, so the students can come in and out, but creating the foundation at the beginning to create the space for them to be seen, heard, and a safe space, and whatever that is for them in that space to have the conversation. And that came about from us having conversations about like, hey, these are experiences I'm having with students. What can we do? And we're like, all right, let's do it. And we also plan to meet students where they're at by providing it via Zoom. TMCC is a total of 5 campuses, so going out to our other campuses as well, because as an HSI, I feel very strongly that we need to be serving our students. And so that I can't expect them all to come to the main campus. I have to be willing, we have to be willing to go and meet them where they're at, because they may not have classes on the Dandini campus. They may be a little further south at Reno. And that's also important. If your campus has more than one campus and or is huge like UNLV, being able to make sure that you can do some in different areas. Those of you that might have students living on campus, having that in the res halls, in your multicultural centers, et cetera.
Yep. And then need males as role models, right? So this is one of the things where I'm constantly including Skylar in the activities and the things that I'm doing, right? He's got the language, he understands it. His master's degree is in social work, right? So he walks the walk and talks the talk. Okay, so that's something that is really beneficial for us. We're
So
almost there at
beneficial.
11.
And that's a wrap, folks. Woo, that's our wrap for today.
Just a comment on the challenges of getting people to seek some mental assistance. I have PTSD, and my experience with looking for assistance, and right away they want to lock me up. I had an incident at CSN that I was having an episode, and I decided, I'm like, because I know myself, I've been dealing with this for 30 years, and I got to know myself up pretty good. And I'm like, bro, you need to go get some help. So I went to CSN, and while I was filling out the form, how truthful can I be? Because they asked, are you violent? Yeah, I can be quite violent. I'm a Marine. I was trained for that. And that's why I go, because that's the part of my brain that starts having issues. When things are not working out, the Marine in me has a solution: blow them up, destroy them, problem solved. So that's the challenge that I always have in my mind, to try to control that. I go to ask for assistance, and I get surrounded by school police. And then I see a person come in to the secretary and asking her, are you okay? Is the danger over? And I was like, what danger? I just came for help.
Yeah.
So now I'm being surrounded by school police telling me that they want to take me to the mental health on the other side. And I'm like, no, I'm not going with you anywhere. That's not the kind of help I came here for. I came here to talk about what's troubling my mind right now. And I know that if we talk this out, I'll be fine. But if you lock me up, that's not going to be fine. It's going to make it worse. So I ended up walking out of there just more enraged. But I went to the park, cried it out, and I go home. And my wife saw me, and she's been my nurse. She sees that something's not right. And I'm the opposite of your husband. I cry everything. I told her everything. But that's my experience with the mental health. Every time I've gone for help, they want to lock me up, and that's not what I'm there for.
And I think that's where having us as diverse folks, right? So I have a lot of experience with our EMS. My brother was a firefighter, wildland firefighter, like The rest of us ran away from the fire. He was going towards it, right? I also had experience with veterans and PTSD and those types of things. So I'm very comfortable, right, in those scenarios and being able to say, okay, is this a safe situation? Or being able to say, whoa, like we had a student not too long ago that regardless of the situation, he felt like he needed to go and meet with his counselor. And he would barrel past our admin assistants and pretty much anybody. Even though his door was closed, he was in session, the student didn't care, right? So I stepped out, right? And so I tease and I'm like, what I need to be, this 4'9" academic can also be 6 foot tall. Right? Be able to say, this is not okay, right? What is it that you need? And being able to clarify, right? Being very explicit with my language. Okay, I will go check in, but I need you to have a seat and sit down, right? Because I will do this for you. It's totally okay. I hear you, I see you, but I need to go and do this, right? And so I think that it comes with experience. It comes with having those experiences, and that's where the diverse folks being in those environments and having the training as well, quite honestly, right? And when we're doing the training, we have to be able to be comfortable standing up and saying, no, right? Hold on, this isn't how we're going to be doing this, right? And so it really does help to have those diverse perspectives. And that's honestly what I think it might have been lacking, and I apologize for that. Right? And hopefully
I'm over
it hasn't turned you off with mental health because there are those diverse perspectives. Right? And if you'd like, we can connect afterwards and maybe I can find some contacts. I have some folks down here.
it. To be honest, like I said, no, man, I've been trying to go for assistance for 30 years. And I don't get no help. The only help I get is from my wife. And she's the one that sits down with me and we talk through it and we solve the issues that are troubling my mind. And I'm like, man, you should be a counselor because she's the one that has been my therapist for the past 12 years. Without her, I would be lost or on the news, one or the other. So.
She's amazing. But yes, let's meet afterwards if you're comfortable.
Can I just add something to that? 'Cause I just attended CSM Mental Health Day, it was like 2 weeks ago, you were there. And Kevin Hines was the speaker, and I didn't know of him before, but he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge when he was 19. And he lived to tell it, and he shares the story, he's written books. But his wife, Margaret, he credits as being the savior, but you should reconnect. Because he was amazing, and that was such a good seminar that day. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was well worth the time to attend. And there's resources, believe me, out there, people that care and want to help.
Awesome. All right. So we already took a couple of minutes of your time. We want to make sure we respect it. So lunch is next, so we never want to stand between someone.
No.
Yeah.